We're starting. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here at Live Real Talk, only on Horizon TV. My name is Feisal Kassim, and we have a lot in store for you. First things first, been a very dramatic quick, but let's start with the first news. On October 13th, we had Justice Korir going on, giving a directive, giving a ruling for sitting governors who have presidential ambitions. Justice say that these governors at least need to resign at least 6 months before they run for public office. Suleiman Nechesa has more on that.
Deputy Chief Justice Philomena Mwilu on Wednesday morning appointed a 5-judge bench to hear and determine constitutional and judicial review application challenging Chief Justice David Maraga's advisory to the President to dissolve Parliament for failing to enact a law to implement the 2/3 gender rule.
We are sorry for that mix-up. That's supposed to be our second story about dissolution of Parliament, and of course it's by Mohammed Chokombo. But as my producer is fixing that, we are going back with that story where Justice Korir on October 13th issued a ruling that for all sitting governors who have presidential ambitions should resign from office at least 6 months prior. So far, we've seen some of the governors who are serving on their second term, including Mombasa's Hassan Ali Joho. We have Machakos' Dr. Alfred Mutua, Kivuth's Kibwana from Makueni, and the list goes on and on. Here is the story from Horizon TV.
Therefore, declare that in the general elections of 2022, I, your son, your brother, one of you, Alfred Nganga Mutua, will vie to be the next president of the Republic of Kenya.
It is a blow to county bosses eyeing presidency in 2022 general elections after a court order that those interested in the presidency should resign 6 months before the election dates. According to Justice Weldon Korir in his ruling, failure by the governors to resign 6 months to the 2022 elections will make them ineligible for the State House race and may also not be cleared by the electoral agency. Justice Korir said the only holders of political office who can stand in a presidential election without relinquishing their offices are the president, the deputy president, and the members of parliament. Among those who have declared their presidential ambitions are Dr. Alfred Mutua of Machakos County and his Makueni counterpart Kivutha Kibwana, Kakamega's Wycliffe Oparanya, and Hassan Joho of Mombasa County. According to Alfred Mutua, the decision is discriminatory, unfair, and unconstitutional.
Who represents a constituency within a county can continue to be in office all the way to the end and run for president. But a governor who represents a constituency with many, who represents a county with many constituencies is not allowed to run without having to resign. It is important for us to be a country of fairness, to be a country that really interprets laws in a way that actually captures the mood of the people on the ground.
Salma Salim, Horizon TV.
Thank you so much, Salma Salim, for the amazing report. Of course, we are here waiting to see how it will all roll out after that ruling from Justice Korir. Moving on, we are talking about matters dissolution of Parliament, and this is after Chief Justice David Maraga issued a statement and an advice to the President to dissolve Parliament. Reason being, failure to implement 2/3 gender rule by the legislators of the 12th Assembly. Mohammed Chokombo has more on that.
Deputy Chief Justice Philomena Mwilu on Wednesday morning appointed a 5-judge bench to hear and determine constitutional and judicial review application challenging Chief Justice David Maraga's advisory to the President to dissolve Parliament for failing to enact a law to implement the 2/3 gender rule. Kenyans, as well as from the Law Society of Kenya, which he has consolidated, urging him to advise the President to dissolve Parliament. The petitions are based on the grounds that despite 4 court orders compelling Parliament to enact the legislation required to implement the 2/3 gender rule, MPs have failed to honor the directions of the court. While some cases are seeking interpretation of the constitution on the matter, Parliament argues that the decision by the Chief Justice was illegal, urging that dissolving the two houses will result into a constitutional crisis. The LSK, headed by its president Nelson Havi, on Monday 12th, marched to the Parliament buildings in what they termed as Occupy Parliament Initiative in support of the Chief Justice Maraga's advice. Muhammad Shakombo, Horizon TV.
It should go on record that we contacted LSK's president Nelson Harvey to come and talk about dissolution of parliament and Occupy Bunge initiative and how it is going about so far, because I mean pictures were seen of him taking tea in parliament buildings. But on to other stories. Out of 39,312,276 COVID-19 positive cases so far globally, the country's contribution to that is 43,580. Of course, with 31,648 total recovered and active cases of 11,119. Let's listen more of that before we start discussing about the recent increase in numbers.
As learners and teachers adjust to new routines in the coronavirus era, head teachers are facing an even bigger task to prepare for full-scale reopening in less than a month. On Monday, Magoha termed the first 14 days of reopening vital in assessing how schools will cope during the coronavirus period.
We have opened now for just about 3 classes. I think we should be bold enough to continue to observe them for about 1 or 2 weeks before we decide as to whether we can risk having larger numbers. So
during this period, greater responsibility will be borne by head teachers as
Apologies once again for that mix-up. We were talking about matters COVID-19 cases. Of course, it is part of the situation whereby we have had schools reopening, where the CS, Education CS, Professor George Magoha, announced that the schools must go back. And if you recall, last week we had that amazing discussion in regards to schools reopening. And joining us this evening as well to talk about matters schools reopening, we have a teacher, who is a teacher in a secondary school, and will be telling us much more about that. But before we discuss matters education, let's listen to Suleiman Necha's story.
As learners and teachers adjust to new routines in the coronavirus era, head teachers are facing an even bigger task to prepare for full-scale reopening in less than a month. On Monday, Magoha termed the first 14 days of reopening vital in assessing how schools will cope during the coronavirus period.
We have opened now for just about 3 classes. I think we should be bold enough to continue to observe them for about 1 or 2 weeks before we decide as to whether we can risk having larger numbers. So
during this period, greater responsibility will be borne by head teachers as they find gaps hampering learners' academics and comfort, find solutions and innovations to create opportunities. School heads will be required to conduct a needs assessment of learners before embarking on regular teaching. While teachers are grappling to put schools in order, they are faced with a bigger financial problem that is hampering their struggle to ensure all set guidelines put in place by the Minister of Health and Education are met. So far, no single COVID-19 budget has been allocated for schools in preparation to fight the pandemic. Speaking to Horizon TV is a head teacher who requested anonymity, codenamed Haj, revealing to us the challenges they are facing as school heads in managing the COVID-19 situation.
The government has not given us anything concerning COVID safeness. It is natural and wisdomic safeness from teachers. When we talk about water, Nairobi we buy water. When we talk sanitization, soap, this water point, government did not provide anything for that.
Haji, who says the school is forced to look for alternatives to acquire water tanks for hand washing, sanitizers and thermogans, reveals that for schools without any financial plans, they will be forced to go a herd immunity way or incur debts to meet the required health standards by the ministry.
I'll show them this, the capitation that the government gave out. I asked them, how do we pay these people? Where do we get wash point? Where do we get soap? Where do we get masks? Because you heard from the media government saying if a child does not give mask, should be given. From where? Have you seen any COVID in here? When we talk of telephone rental postage, it is 2 shillings times 200 pupils you have in a school. The telephone postage is 9,500. Where are you going to get the rest? Environmentals and clean, let's say this one is cleaning the compound, times 200 pupils. What are you telling people? Then you say education is free. Why are we cheating people?
In addition, the head teacher reveals that no training has been done to teachers to handle any COVID-19 situation in case it arises, despite the ministry stating that all institutions should establish surveillance aimed at early detection of unexplained respiratory infections, monitor learners or trainees' body temperatures, and maintain health record books. Haj states that no single health unit has been set aside in schools for emergency assistance, since most institutions have no facility for such provisions, and schools have no funds to hire a health expert, since most of the support staff have not been paid for the past 3 months.
In fact, the government is saying we should have a preserved room to take care of that. Government does not give us nurses. In fact, they're supposed to be 2. When this child is sick, we don't have masks, we don't have gloves, we don't have first aid kit, we don't have that bed, and they are saying it should have a toilet, a room created for any sick, affected child to be taken there. Who is going to take care of that child? I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor.
Mr. Haji says that achieving social distance in class is a bigger challenge facing many schools, and what is needed is more space for learners rather than desks.
We are reopening the school. What preparedness have you done? When you talk of social distance, this class 1 has got 80 pupils. Already, the desks are packed to the blackboard. You are telling us you are bringing more desks to put where? Who has asked you for those? Teachers are asking preparedness, expand classes, or create tents. You are bringing desks to put where? It is
a sad state of affairs, as only 20% of 689 shillings, being the 3rd term allocation for financial year 2020-2021, has been disbursed to schools, a move which, according to Haj, is still far from helping the schools, and he called upon the ministry to release the remaining 30% to help institutions run their daily affairs. The utilization of these funds is divided as follows, according to the directive by the Minister of Education, signed by the Principal Secretary for Education, Dr. Bilio Kipsang. Support staff wages, including security, 50 shillings, allocated per pupil. Repair, maintenance and improvement of physical facilities, 40 shillings per pupil. Local transport and traveling, 10 shillings per pupil. Electricity, water and conservancy, 20 shillings per pupil. Telephone, 2.8 shillings. Environmental and sanitation, including safety of procured food, 15 shillings. Total 137.8 shillings. Allocation per pupil. Despite schools not being ready to meet all set guidelines to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, Professor Magoha has revealed that parents should prepare their children for the second phase of reopening in 1 or 2 weeks' time, a move which has been received with mixed reaction by parents.
Sisi kama wazazi, zile plan zetu tulikuwa nazo za watoto kwenda September, tulishelve, tukasema watoto wanaenda January. Baadaye in less than 1 week, that's already October, tunaambiwa watoto wanaenda shule in less than 5 days. Now with the economy tuko nayo sahi, kama sisi wazazi wengi tuko jua kali, na hii jua kali sahi haina pesa, na hii ndio tunategemea watoto waende shule. So some of us tulikuwa tumejipanga kuanzia hii muda ilikuwa imebaki kama 2-3 months hii to save pesa ndio tupeleke watoto shuleni, lakini wametuambusha
kusema shule ifunguliwe na shule zingine ilikuwa na stream karibu 4. Je, hiyo stream 4 kwa the same class from 1A, from 2B, from 3. Sasa wata accommodate namna gani na ni saa ngapi? Na shule zingine hasina bibuyu ya maji. Shule zingine hasina maji, hasina access ya maji. Shule zingine hata hasina matangi. Je, report ya government kuhusu hizo vitu iko wapi kwa mzazi wenzetu?
Yenyewe tumechanganywa kiasi kwa sababu hata kalenda yenyewe ni kama imeharibika. Na tulikuwa tunatarajia, kama mimi nilikuwa natarajia iwe mwaka kesho.
Imekuwa ni changamoto sana kwa wazazi. Sababu kitu ya kwanza pesa imekuwa ni shida. Corona imekuja juzi, imeharibu kazi. So hakuna pesa generally. But sisi kama wazazi tungependelea watoto warudi shule na waendelee na masomo. Kwa hivyo ingekuwa tu vizuri wangesema eti next year kitu kama Januari hivi wapeane like 3 months or 2 wazazi wajipange. Juu kumbuka wewe umetolewa kazi, una pesa. Hata saa zingine kwa nyumba unalala njaa. Ni kuvumilia tu. Unaona? Sasa hii school fee itatoka wapi?
Nechesa Suleiman, Horizon TV.
Thank you so much, Suleiman Nechesa, for that comprehensive report. And we're going to bring in as well Dr. Majid Tahir, who is an Associate Dean and Associate Dean, Clinical Affairs and Chief of Staff, Aga Khan University Hospital, to discuss about the rising numbers as well. First things first, Mwalimu Hoda Hamisi, 5 days on since school were reopened. I mean, students were supposed to report back in school from the 12th of October, and we are on 16th of October. 5 days from Monday up to today, Friday. What's your take on that? How do you see the situation? How can you describe it?
Oh, thank you very much, Feisal. Assessing on the situation, we still need a lot of preparedness, a lot of psychological preparedness in terms of telling the students now you are back to school. We only gave them 4 days to prepare to come back to school. So we are still preparing them psychologically before now we embark on teaching and everything that entails. So part of the preparation is just ensuring that they follow the COVID-19 guidelines given by the government.
And Dr. Majid Tahir, the government, of course, through the CS of Education, Professor George Magoha, ordered that the schools should be reopened from the 12th. And we are looking since the 14th, the numbers are on an ascending trajectory. Do you think it was wise to reopen the schools this open, Dr. Tariq? This soon, sorry?
Shukran. Okay, so let's look at where the virus is coming from, so that we apportion responsibility in the right place. The rising numbers are not coming from the schools. The rising numbers, yesterday it was 600, today it's 437, are coming from the community. So if we are to stop our children getting infected, the focus should be in the community. Since the economy was open, why have the numbers risen? Who stopped us from putting on masks? Who stopped us from exercising social distance? Who stopped us from hand hygiene? The virus is not found in the food. So what we need to do is to continue exercising responsible care of ourselves. In this way, we stop infecting our children. By the time they go to school, the children have no infection. Therefore, their risk of infecting other children is zero. If you have no infection, how are you going to infect others? But the children who will infect others in school are the ones who are infected at home.
Dr. are you trying to say there is no 100% relation between this increase in numbers and the schools reopening? Are you trying to say that?
Absolutely, because the numbers started rising before the schools were reopened.
Okay, interesting. Coming back to you, Teacher Huda Hamis, talking about schools being reopened, have you, as the direct people who are coming from the community and of course dealing with the students coming from different parts of the country as well, have you been trained, have you been given enough sufficient training by the government before handling these students coming back?
So we had 2 weeks prior to the students coming back to school. We didn't have formal training, but we were given the basics on how to deal with the students, on how we are going to ensure that they wash their hands, the basics on what happens if a kid decides not to come to school, or maybe what happens when a kid is sick and you assume that this kid is having the disease or something of the sort. So we were given guidelines according to what the Ministry of Health and what the Ministry of Education was supposed to ensure that the students and the learners are in school and are safe in school.
Interesting. Molimo, again, maybe as the second last question, a lot of teachers and educationists are really complaining about the expansion of classes, right? The increase of desks, and rather they are complaining about the expansion of classes. Do you think it's a priority to expand and construct more classes at this point in time?
Okay, since we don't know when the virus will come to a halt, there is need for extra classrooms if we're to reconsider the other classes coming back to school. Because right now we are having maybe the Form 4s. The Form 4s are occupying close to half the number of classrooms. What if we have the Form 1s, the Form 2s, and the Form 3s? So what will happen to them? Basically, maybe a school has 16 classes, and now we are having the Form 4s being divided. So they're taking close to 10 classes. So 6 classes are remaining. How are we going to accommodate the Form 1s, the Form 2s, and the Form 3s?
So are you trying to suggest that the other classes should stay back despite the directive by the Ministry of Education saying that the other classes should resume in 1 or 2 weeks? Are you trying to suggest that they should still hold back?
What I'm trying to suggest is basically we should sit down and look for a way forward, because we are not quite sure when the disease will end, and we don't want to make our kids be at risk in any way. So it's a matter of the stakeholders sitting down and coming up with a viable solution to that. Okay.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ari, for your time this evening. Now, Dr. Majid Twahir, coming back to you, you're saying that this disease is coming from the community. Now, what you've mentioned about the face masks, you've mentioned about the hygiene. But again, of course, being the devil's advocate, who is not here, hypothetically speaking, this disease to some extent has been politicized. On one end, the medics, of course, which you guys are telling us, keep home, stay home, stay safe, sanitize, But at the same time, we're looking at the political class coming up and organizing these rallies, and the common monarchy is saying that this disease has been politicized to some extent. So it's quite hypocritical for him to stay back at home and stay safe, trying to sanitize, avoiding public gathering, yet all this is happening at the same time, Dr.
Yeah, you make a very, very good point. Our politicians need to be role models. We look up to them, we follow what we do. Even if we are to go out, let them at least put on masks as models. Those rallies, I'd rather they have more rallies and fewer people rather than have few rallies and many people, so that people can exercise at least 1.5 meters away from each other. And if you can't exercise this, or in addition to exercising this, let everybody put on masks. I see nobody with masks in those rallies. I'm actually quite anxious about that. So you're absolutely right. The politicians need to set an example for everybody in Kenya. But we too need to exercise the responsibility for our own behaviors.
Dr. What we are looking at currently in the recent rise in numbers, this is not unique to Kenya. It has happened before in France until on 14th of October, France reintroduced curfew from dusk till dawn again, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. We've seen British going on a second lockdown. A number of states in the United States of America as well, they've gone on a second lockdown. This is not unique to Kenya. Is this the second wave that you are warning us about?
So we need to look at it in two ways. Cities like Mombasa, Nairobi, the towns near Nairobi, which had a peak. For sure, those towns are going to their second wave. When you look at the peripheral towns like Turkana and DC, they are beginning to get their first wave now. So these towns are going through their first wave. So if you consider this point, that this virus is going to be here with us for a long time, because those towns in the peripheries, those counties in the peripheries have not even gone through their first wave, leave alone the second wave. So we are having a mix of first wave in the big towns, the second wave in the big towns, and first wave still in the smaller towns in the periphery.
So, Dr. just to make us understand better, this second wave that's coming, is it the same virus or is it a change in virus? And if it's the same virus, those people who had already contacted this virus in the first wave, are they eligible to contact this virus once again during this second wave? Okay.
Again, very, very good. So, if you look at our knowledge of the virus, the first virus was detected in December last year. In Kenya, we had our first virus. We've had a very little time to understand the virus. So if you get infected the first time, do you get complete immunity? The answer is that most likely, but we cannot say 100% sure. So the second wave is not for people who have been infected before. It's new infections. We have very few people who worldwide who've been reported to have had a second infection. So imagine we've taken very good care and precaution, and people who are at high risk have not been infected so far. But since the economy was open, we abandoned all precautions. Now we're infecting new people who are not infected before. That's what the second wave is about, is new infections of people who are not previously infected before. And many of these people were exercising extra precautions because they had additional illnesses. Now, if these are the people getting infected now, we expect, therefore, we're going to have higher mortality.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Dr. for those answers this evening. And we are also having Jamia's Friday Bulletin correspondent, that is Gamal Gamil, and we are having Sumaya Hussein as well, who is an editor talking about an incident that happened in Rwanda quite recently. But before we talk about matters Rwanda, let's finish up with the country, where we're having Gamal Gamil, who is Jamia-owned Friday Bulletin. Jamal, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Jamal. Jamal, have you enabled your audio? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Have you enabled your audio from the app? As we are fixing the small technical hitch with Jamal Jamil, whereby we are going to talk about the directive issued by NEMA, of course, to two mosques in Nairobi, that is Parklands Mosque and City Park Mosque, respectively, in regards to their adhan, the call to prayer, whereby some neighbors complained that they are being disturbed, and they took the matter to NEMA, which issued a warning to the two mosques. But some Muslim leaders move up to speed, including Jamia Mosque's Deputy Secretary General Ibrahim Ahmed. We have in SUPKEM Chairman Hassan al-Enado moved with speed. Gamal Jamil, of course, covered that story on today's Friday Bulletin, and he'll be talking to us much more about that. Then we cross the borders over to Rwanda, but that and much more will be coming to you after this very short break. Don't you go away, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Somebody there, can I leave now?
HorizonTV, the beacon for the nation.
Kuanzia Jumatatu hadi Ijumaa kila saa 2 hadi saa 3 asubuhi na saa 10 hadi 10:30 jioni, HorizonTV ikishirikiana na taasisi ya maendeleo ya mtaala yani KICD itakuletea vipindi vya masomo ya msingi na ya sekondari. Usikose kuungana nasi kila siku ya wiki saa 2 hadi saa 3 asubuhi na saa 10 hadi 10:30 jioni.
La kutafakari.
Hatupendani. Mahaba yetu yako katika nini? Leo ukimwona mtu yompenda mwenzake sana, wallahi kabila moja. Ukiona wapendana sana, watoka kijiji kimoja. Ukiona wapendana sana, basi wanapenda vitu moja moja. Yani kuna vitu wameshirikiana katika mapenzi ya hivyo vitu. Leo angalia hata katika harusi, angalia katika janaza, pafe mtu hapa leo, akifa Mdigo wa Digo ndio wengi, akifa Msomali wa Somali ndio wengi, akifa Mchonyi wa Chonyi ndio wengi, akifa mtu wa Lamu ndio atakuwa watu wengi hapa, akifa mtu wa bara, subhana rabbil izza, sijui atazikwa na nani. Muhammad Karioki aje afe hapa, atazikwa na nani katika sisi? Hatumjui, tutasema hivi. Mpelekeni Sakina mjini. Manake Sakina ndio upelekwa watu wasokuwa na watu wao. Vipi Muislamu atolewe mtu hapo apelekwe Sakina kwa sababu hana mtu? Ni mfano tu nauliza, sijui kama mafanyia hivyo watu hapo. Lakini sidhani akafa Onyango Omari kama atapata janaza kama vile akifa mmoja wetu sisi makabila yaliokuwa mwingi mtu hapa, tutahisi kama kumkufa mtu. Naulizeni ndugu Waislamu, mimbar kazi yake kusema kweli. Ni Wadigo ngapi watakuja kumzika Onyango alokufa hapa ambaye ni Muhammad Onyango ama Omar Karioki? Ni Wabajuni wangapi watakuja kumzika Omar Karioki hapa? Ni Wasomali wangapi watakuja kumzika? Ni Waswahili wangapi watakuja kumzika mtu ambaye si Mswahili mwenzao? Ni wanabiashara wangapi watakuja kumzika mtu ambaye kwamba maskini hoye hahe ana kibanda tu pale? Ni matajiri wangapi watakuja kumzika na wanabiashara? Paka afe tajiri mwenzao ndio msikiti utajaa matajiri, magari makubwa yatakuwa hapa, hata parking haitatosha. Watu watatoka mjini, wengine watoke na Kilifi, wankuja kumzika jidosi mwenzao. Kamba ule udosi utatusaidia kesho mbele ya Mwenyezi Mungu ama hapo kaburini. Tukosa kufahamu mambo muhimu. Alokufa ni Muislamu, haijalishi wamjua ama humjui.
La kutafakari.
Qala ta'ala fi muhkami tanzilihi ba'da a'udhu billahi minash shaitani rrajim.
Ni nasaha kutoka pwani.
Hadha ad-din qala Allah qala ar-rasul qala as-sahabatu hum ulul irfani. Intaha.
Ili kuongoza kwenye njia iliyonyoka.
Sikizeni hadithi hii ya Mtume alayhi salatu wasalam. Hakuna atakayeweza kumfungia mtu mlango ambaye Mwenyezi Mungu aliyemfungulia.
Kuimarisha imani yako.
Thabbit qulubana ala dinik wa ala ta'atik.
Ungana na mashekh wetu kutoka pwani kwenye mimbar.
Mimbar zinamwakilisha Mtume sallallahu alayhi wasallam.
Ni Jumamosi na wakati saa 3 usiku katika Horizon TV, runinga uipendayo.
Isha Adhan, Nairobi City Time.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته إنك لا تخلف الميعاد.
O Allah, Lord of this perfect call and established prayer, grant Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, the intercession and favor, and raise him to the honored station you have promised him. Verily, you do not fail in your promises.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you so much for keeping it live, Real Talk, right here on Horizon TV. Now, Dr. Majid Tahir, before we let you go this evening, maybe what would be your advice to the citizens outside there and our viewers tonight who are watching you? Because, I mean, we are all conflicted in between the two. We're looking at one, the medics telling us that this disease is true and it exists and it kills. On the other hand, we are seeing what our leaders who are preaching to us, some of them giving addresses to the press about this disease and how we should stay back at home. And at the same time, going about their political moves. What would be your advice to Kenyans on this?
Shukran, Jazakallah. We need to listen to good advice and discard bad advice. We need to be sensible about this. I think the disease has spread enough, especially at the coast areas and Nairobi, that everybody knows somebody who has died of this disease. So for sure, without a doubt, this disease is real. I work in a hospital, I've seen people die of this disease. So there's no doubt that this disease is real. The precautions are easy to take. We need to be sensible about it. I understand people do get tired, but let's encourage each other. to continue exercising precaution. The same applies when our children go to school. Let's continue with those precautions. Let's try to come up with innovative ways. We all as Kenyans, if we put our heads together, we cannot resolve this matter of crowding in schools. We can figure out how to teach students in shifts and reduce the overcrowding. That is important. But more importantly, if we can continue exercising our own hand hygiene, face masks, social distancing, we will stop our children from getting infected. Once we stop the children from getting infected, there will be no infection. So let's not drop our guard yet, irrespective of what the politicians are doing. Let's not follow the bad examples by the politicians, and let's follow the good examples that some politicians are setting. That would be my remarks this month.
And thank you so much, Dr. Tahir, for making time for us this evening. Now, moving on to other matters, quite shocking. It's about the National Environment Management Authority, I'm talking about NEMA, that had issued warnings to City Park and Parklands Mosque over their call to prayer, that is Adhan, saying that the noise was too much, polluting and disturbing the neighbors around the neighborhood. Something which, as I said earlier, Jamia Mosque leaders and Supreme National Body, I'm talking about SUP, can move with speed to arrest the issue. Now, joining us is Jamia on Friday Bulletin's editor, Jamal Jamil, who covered that story and actually wrote about it on today's issue of the Friday Bulletin. Jamal, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks so much for making time for us this evening, Jamal. And kindly take us through what was really happening for as far as this issue of Neymar issuing, gagging the mosque is concerned. What was really happening?
Okay, on October 13th, on the span of 24 hours, two mosques in Parklands area, actually City Park and Parklands, they're usually close to each other. There are mosques there, Parklands Mosque and City Park Mosque. They were issued a directive to stop using amplifying sound by NEMA because of, I quote, noise pollution. Yeah.
Jamal, according to your piece, you've written that Jamia Mosque and SUPKE moved with speed to arrest the issue. And so, does that mean that right now is status quo remains, that is, they're allowed to use the speakers as they were using before?
I think so. According to Ibrahim Yusuf, alias Johnny, the Assistant Secretary General of Jamia Mosque, he assured Muslim faithful, like, issue has been handled, and now even the SUPKEM chair said, like, the CS Kiriako Tobiko, the CS for Environment, have recalled the letter and regretted the notice was issued by Nairobi County NEMA office.
Jamal, thanks so much for that. And I'm sure this is not the first time such is happening in our country, Kenya, for as far as the Adhan is concerned. Now, what have the leaders say for a long-term sustainable solution in this case so that we don't experience such again in future? Do you have anything indicative from the leaders as they were addressing this issue?
Yeah, first, there's a legal team representing the two mosques. They say that the mosques have been operating for more than 30 years, and it's not advisable to direct them to stop using amplifying sounds. So the leaders have come together on this issue, and they've said that they deliberate more concerning this issue because it sounds like there's an, I don't want to put it like Islamophobia, but there's an infringement of right of worship by trying to...
But that's what you've said, that's what you have described the move as, Islamophobia, in a move termed as Islamophobic. That's what you said in your piece today.
Actually, that's what it is.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jamal Jamil, who is Friday Bulletin's editor, for your interesting insight on that issue regarding the two mosques. And now to interesting story from our neighboring country, Rwanda, whereby the government, through His Excellency the President of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, they have actually given a green light into cultivation, processing and export of marijuana. An interesting, shocking move that we see in the 21st century, despite the knowledge being outside open about how harmful this disease can be. We're having Sumaya Hussein from Invest Africa, who wrote their story on that. Sumaya, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much for making time for us this evening. Thank
you for having me.
Sumaya, honestly, personally speaking, from a personal point of view, that is quite, it's not a good move. It's shocking to see such as happening in the 21st century. What's your take on that?
Honestly, Feisal, I don't think it's really shocking, considering this is not the first African country and obviously not the first country to legalize production and exportation of cannabis. And for your question of what do I think about it, from a business perspective, it is definitely a smart move, considering they are tapping into a multi-billion-dollar market, because we know that weed is the most popular crop, cash crop now in the world, and right now we're looking at $345 billion. That is the global market for marijuana.
So in this case, they are choosing livelihood over the lives of people, over the morality of the country, over the number of people who are going to be affected, talk of morally, talk of mentally, talk of health-wise. Basically, a lot is going to happen. So they're choosing the economics of the country as opposed to all this?
Let me tell you something, Feisal. They have legalized the production and exportation of the drug for medicinal purposes to other countries. They have not legalized it in Rwanda itself. So it's still strictly prohibited to sell, to prescribe as a doctor, or to use it as a citizen in Rwanda. So when you're talking about the livelihoods of the Rwandese, it's not affected in any way in terms of morality and the harmful effects of marijuana, because they're not using it. They're simply...
I mean, you've already given a green light of production, cultivation, processing, and export. Then what measures will... I mean, if given you as the writer of this, I'm sure you've done enough and due diligence research for as far as this topic is concerned. Have they mentioned anything about putting in structures and systems that will stop those people who are cultivating, processing, and exporting from internal use?
Yes, definitely they have. In fact, they started by making it clear that just because now they can cultivate and export it, it does not mean that you can now start abusing it. And therefore, there will be strict regulations which were given out by the cabinet meeting on Monday that was chaired by Paul Kagame. And people will be required to have licenses for production of the drug. And because now they're getting into some tough business, definitely tough measures will have to be put in place.
Of course, hoping that this never gets into this country, being a religious and a very strictly cultured country, talking about Kenya, because this discussion was introduced in 2018 where the late Kibra MP, Honorable Ken Okoth, started this discussion on the floor of the House, but again, it never saw the light of the day, hoping that it does not see the light of the day, because as it is already, people are suffering from this disease. And of course, we all know what Islam says about drugs in general, that it is not allowed. Sumaya, what would be your final take, of course, to Kenyans for as far as this topic is concerned?
Maybe if I look at it on a religious perspective, I would say in Islam, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said about intoxicating drugs is that if a little intoxicates, then abstain from the much. So definitely, even though you wouldn't be using it, because some people might argue about medicinal purposes, it is not the only alternative. It's not the only option, the alternative when it comes to medicinal purposes. And it's also not the only way to grow your economy. So if it is harmful, then it would be better for us to abstain from it completely.
Well, thank you so much, Sumas. And of course, this is a topic that we are going to talk way much more about, inshallah, next week when we get scholars. We're going to invite you again, once again, Sumaya, to have this discussion. Thank you so much, Sumaya Hussain, for making time for us this evening. Thank you so much, Mwalimu Huda, for making time for us this evening. Asante Sana, Dr. Majid Tahir, of course, all the way from Mombasa. Gamal Gamil, thank you so much as well for making time. And thank you, our viewer, for making time for us this and every Friday right here on Live Real Talk, only on Horizon TV. Now, I want to take it to slumber. Last week we spoke about the things that you can control and those that you cannot control. And we said that never waste your time about the things that you cannot control, but instead focus on those that which you can control. This week, let's talk about value. Earlier on this week, I had a conversation with a colleague of mine about our education system, talking about 844 OCBC, which one is best. And I personally rooted for 844. And I said that 844 is one amazing education system that we had in this country. Only that one thing was missing. That is, how do we teach those people who are going through 844 to create value out of themselves? We have a lot of graduates outside here. They have this education, formal education system that they have taken for like 20 years or 16 years of their lives, irrespective of the numbers. But basically they have certificates and papers piling up in their suitcases or in their drawers. But how do they convert that education into value into this job market? That is the conversation that I think we should be having in this country. Now let me give you an assignment. If you're a graduate, you've studied journalism or engineering or law or whatever course that you might have studied, and you're still tamaking outside there looking for opportunity, ask yourself one question. You had at least hundreds of your fellow schoolmates that you graduated together with on the same year. That's only one university. Think about the rest of the universities across the country. How many people might have graduated, you know? At the same time, how many law firms that are there in the country? How many law positions are there in the country? Cuts across all the other courses, talk of engineering, all the fields of study, engineering, journalism, and all that. So ask yourself one question. What makes you a different accountant? What makes you a different lawyer? What makes you a different journalist? What value are you bringing on to the table? What makes you different? What is your value? Why should you be hired despite your papers? Talk of masters, how many people have masters? Talk of PhDs, how many of you have PhDs? Talk of simple bachelors, how many of you are holders of bachelors in whatever field that you hold? Right? So what is the value? What are you bringing onto the table? And that is our ticket to slumber. Thanks so much for your time this evening. I have been your host, Feisal Kassim. See you next week. Same place, same time, I don't know. We'll see about that next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.